Let's talk about real estate investing. It just so happens that I have a personal deal that I'm selling and was analyzing the numbers recently, and I thought this may be of benefit to you if you're either an active real estate investor or maybe you've just thought about getting into that and are curious how the numbers actually play out over the long haul. So I have this rental property. I bought it back in 2015, up here February of 2015. Here we are in August of 2024, so 9.5-ish years ago. And it was under contract. The deal just fell apart because the buyer's no longer moving to town. But I should still sell it for a price that nets roughly $200,000. And again, so selling it for an amount that after expenses will yield a result somewhere around that number. And I paid, back in the day, $34,000 for the property. And so I wanted to look at and had the thought, what portion of the benefit of owning this property for 9.5, almost 10 years comes from the appreciation of the asset, some of which would be just demand for real estate, some of it would be forced appreciation through renovations and improvements that I've made over the years. So what portion of the deal comes from that? What portion of the benefit or return comes from the cash flow that I've been getting in over the months and years from owning that property and keeping it as a rental? And so here are the numbers, and forgive me having to turn around and point to the board, mark on the board. I couldn't figure out a place in our office for a good whiteboard location to shoot the video, so we're just at my desk. But if you look up here at the top, over the period of about 9.5 years, which would include some vacancy because I did some work at the beginning, did some work at the end, but I collected about $109,000 in rent over that period of time. And then same period of time spent right around $75,000. I rounded these numbers in one direction or the other when I was pulling them out of my system just to make the math simpler and easier to understand. But $109,000 in rent collected, $75,000 in expenses. The one maybe cheat that would make this the rental equation or the income from owning the property look less attractive would be I didn't separate out what from a tax perspective would be a capital expenditure. Like we did windows, therefore I can't expense that. It adds to the basis of the property. That would be added to the $34,000 when I sell it. Same with, I think we put in a new AC unit in it. I had repiped the property, but some of the things that I did, painting, flooring, and I'm not the accountant. So point being, some of these would be capital expenditures. Some of them would be actual expenses, taxes, insurance, management fees, etc. But I didn't differentiate those because that would have required more of me looking at spreadsheets and P&Ls for the last 9 years, and I just didn't feel like doing that. But when I examine the numbers, you can see this pretty stark contrast between what was the net, or $34,000, I'm going to look at it from this direction, $34,000 was the net income over that period of time, if I'm including all of the expenses as expenses and not capital expenditures. And then the difference between what I sold it for and what I bought it for was 34 into 200, or from 200 is $166,000. So there's this very stark contrast between the cash flow that was collected over that time and the real estate appreciation over that same period of time. And what I started to think through was, really up front, I bought this property because it was in an area, kind of a C class, maybe B minus neighborhood that I thought would be a good cash flow property, holding it for the long term. And it was, but there was still a much greater return from the appreciation of the asset. And when I started to look at this, it's almost the 80-20 rule applied. Not quite if you do the math, but it's pretty close. And when I started to look at my other rental properties, and then just properties in general, and knowing what I know about the average cost to own and maintain rentals of a particular age in a particular area, I could start applying these averages to any home in any neighborhood in Jacksonville and quickly realized that no matter where you're buying, and there were some exceptions to this, you get to properties that are too expensive and cash flow gets to be so poor that like you're just going to be draining your bank account, keeping these things afloat over the years until you get to the appreciation that may take a decade. And then the flip side of that is true as well. You may get into neighborhoods that are so rough that, again, you can't keep things moving forward in a way that would allow you to own it for a long period of time and keep your sanity, and therefore you never get to this. But within reason, almost 80% of any gain over a long enough period of time comes from the appreciation of the asset, and roughly 20% of the gain over that same period of time comes from the cash flow that you receive. And what that meant to me, here's sort of the punchline, is that I get so caught up as a real estate investor in making sure that the cash flow is going to be sufficient for it to be a suitable rental property that I lose sight of. If I'm buying in a good area and I can just get moderately decent cash flow, I should just buy it. Because the real win in owning real estate over the long term is that it's going to appreciate. It's going to pace with inflation, and in Florida, outpace inflation, almost any 10-year segment you can look at. And I did end up finding both an article online and a podcast that talked about the same thing. They were smarter than I was. They had done more research than I had, but they landed on the same conclusion, that don't get too caught up in whether or not you're making the exact amount of cash flow you want every month. If it's $100 off or a couple $100 off, but it's otherwise a good property in a good area, it may just make sense to pull the trigger, wait, and let the asset, let the house, let the real estate investment do its thing over time. So that was the thing that I learned recently that I wanted to share. Hope that's helpful. If you have any questions about it, feel free to give me a call, 904-405-1995, or you can shoot me an email, jeff@pursuitrealestate.com. Take care. We'll catch up soon.